Hello everyone, my name is Cynthia, and today I want to speak to you straight from the heart, in my own voice, like I'm sitting across from you beneath the wide African sky, with the late sunlight touching the rooftops and the evening birds calling from the mango trees. Because what I'm about to share is personal and complicated and, I hope, ultimately healing. It's the true story of how I married a man much older than me, how I became a stepmother to his teenage son, and how our family walked through confusion, silence, remorse, forgiveness, and finally peace. I'm telling it like a documentary confession, but in the warm way I'd speak to neighbors after church or friends gathered around a charcoal grill at dusk. Because even though we live in a bustling African city, where traffic horns weave through the chatter of street vendors, and the scent of suya and roasted maize drifts with the wind, the feelings I'm describing are universal: love, fear, patience, the work it takes to become a family. I never thought I'd marry a man 18 years older, but life has a way of surprising you. Jerry came into my life like a calm breath after a storm. Gentle, generous, steady, a widower who carried a quiet wisdom in his eyes, and the careful manners of a man who had known grief and chosen kindness anyway. He wasn't just any man, though. He had a son, Emma, a tall 17-year-old with his father's striking features and his own private weather, shadows in the gaze, distance in the posture, an ache that reminded me he had lost his mother and wasn't ready to let someone else into that sacred space. I understood that loving Jerry meant embracing his past, including his boy, and I told myself I was ready for that challenge. Still, the morning I moved into their home, our home now in a neighborhood where the streets are alive from dawn with women bargaining over tomatoes, children in checkered uniforms chasing the school bus, and men rolling open the metal shutters of roadside shops, I greeted Emma with a warm, "Good morning, Emma," and he brushed past me like Harmattan wind, cold and dry, saying nothing. My heart dipped, but Jerry squeezed my hand and whispered, "Give him time, Cynthia, he'll come around." And I nodded, holding that hope like a small flame cupped against the breeze. Days turned into weeks. I cooked what I was told were his favorites: jollof on Sunday, egusi when I could get the good melon seeds, a simple stew with fresh okra from the open market. I packed his lunch for school, folded his laundry, even straightened his room when he left it in a hurry, though every motherly thing I did vanished into silence. At the table he barely looked at me, and when I tried to start a conversation, he answered with a single word and escaped into his phone or into the bottom of his bowl. I won't lie, it stung, but I kept going because that's what love does in its first hard season. It keeps going. One afternoon, he came home with a small cut on his hand, likely from bumping into something on a packed dala, or maybe a careless moment in the school workshop. I asked gently, "What happened to your hand?" And he shrugged. "It's nothing," trying to slip away, but I fetched the first aid box, motioned for him to sit, and cleaned the wound with careful hands. When I finished, he said, "Thank you, Auntie Cynthia," with a softness I had not heard before, and a tiny flower of hope opened in my chest. The next morning I was watching a local talk show, the fan spinning lazily overhead. When I heard footsteps, Emma asked, "What are you watching?" "Can I join you?" And I nearly dropped the remote. "Of course," I said, and we sat together laughing at the funny parts, sharing little comments, building a small bridge between two distant shores. From then, things shifted by degrees. He began to help me in the kitchen, chopping onions, stirring the pot, and he called me Auntie Cynthia with an ease that felt like a tiny victory each time. Yet as the weeks wandered forward, something in his gaze changed. Compliments that started simple grew personal. "You look beautiful today, Auntie Cynthia," and "Your smile is really nice." At first, I told myself it was a boy learning to be kind, but there was a brightness in his eyes that made my stomach tighten, something not quite appropriate, like sun at the wrong hour. I tried to brush it away. Maybe I was imagining things, but the feeling stayed, a quiet drumbeat at the edge of every room where he lingered a little too long. Jerry traveled often for business, trips to other cities along the coast or upcountry, chasing contracts, and when I was alone with Emma, the house's quiet turned heavy. One evening, washing dishes at the sink, I felt him stand too near and ask in a soft tone if I needed help. "No, I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and he didn't move. Instead, he leaned on the counter, eyes on me, and murmured, "You're really beautiful," words that landed like a stone in my chest. I thanked him lightly, as women do to shield themselves, but I didn't feel safe inside that sentence. That night, lying beside Jerry, the ceiling fan whispering above, I replayed the moment and asked myself whether I was overthinking. The mind can make a thunderstorm from a single cloud, I told myself, and still something felt wrong. I decided not to tell Jerry, not yet because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to plant a poison seed if there was no tree. But truth has a way of growing even in silence. Days became weeks. Emma's compliments multiplied. His presence became constant, and coincidence no longer explained how he always seemed to be where I was. Perhaps he was trying to bond, I told myself, but in my bones I knew this was more. One afternoon, Jerry left again on business. The house felt too big, the air too still. Later, as I sat in the living room with the windows open to the evening calls of hawkers selling ground nuts and fruit, Emma walked in with a look I can only describe as a mix of nervous courage and heavy determination. He sat across from me and said, "I need to talk to you," and my heart tapped a warning. He stared at his hands, then up at me. "I don't know how to say this, but I have feelings for you, Auntie Cynthia. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. You're kind and beautiful, and you've treated me better than anyone." And for a moment, the world tilted. I stood slowly and said, as gently as I could, "Emma, stop. You can't speak to me that way. I am your father's wife. I am your stepmother. This is not right." And he said he knew that he had tried to fight it but couldn't. My hands shook as I told him the conversation had to end, that he was young and confused and that the feelings would pass. He looked wounded, apologized, and left the room, while I stood trembling, the weight of what had just happened settling on my shoulders like dusk. For days after, I avoided him, tidying the garden, hiding in my room, timing my steps so we didn't cross paths. And I debated telling Jerry, fear wrestling with loyalty inside my chest. How do you tell a father that his son has crossed a line of words, that he's lost in a feeling he doesn't understand? At last I chose the only honest way forward. The next time Jerry came back, after we'd said our goodnights and the house had quieted to crickets and far-off music, I whispered his name and told him everything. Emma's compliments, the confession, the way the air in the house had changed. Jerry listened in stunned silence, then asked in a voice both hurt and controlled why I hadn't told him sooner. I said I wasn't sure at first, and I didn't want to create a crack in our home if I was imagining shadows. He pressed a palm to his forehead, then said he would talk to Emma. In the morning, he called his son into the living room. I stayed behind the bedroom door, heart pounding, and listened to the steadiness in Jerry's voice as he said, "Cynthia has told me everything." There was a long quiet, then Emma's trembling apology. Jerry said, without anger but with weight, that he had trusted him to protect me when he traveled, that Cynthia was family and deserved respect, that this house would not be a place of confusion. Emma said he hadn't meant to hurt us, that he couldn't control how he felt. And Jerry told him feelings are not a crime, but actions matter. Boundaries matter. And family is a promise you keep even when your heart storms. I wanted to weep at the compassion in Jerry's tone because it reached for both of us, his wife and his son, like two hands outstretched. I hoped things would settle after that, but in truth they swung to the other extreme. Emma withdrew completely, retreating to his room, moving like a ghost through hallways, leaving the dining table half-eaten, avoiding me as if my presence burned. I called him for meals and he didn't come, so I placed his plate outside his door and walked away, hearing the click of the handle only after my footsteps faded. He did his own laundry, kept his school bag locked in his room, and when I knocked to return a forgotten book, there was no answer until I left it on the floor and went back downstairs. The door opened and closed quietly, like a sigh. Jerry noticed the change and worried he had been too hard, but I told him maybe Emma just needed time. Still, the house felt colder, and the absence of simple courtesies, that good night, that thank you, felt heavier than yelling would have. Sometimes quiet can be the loudest punishment. 6 weeks passed like that. I kept caring for him in the small. practical ways that remain when words fail, meals, clean sheets, tidying his space when he was away. And I prayed. In the African way my mother taught me, quietly, with open hands, that the boy would find his way back to himself and to us. Then one evening, as the sun lowered and the power flickered and returned, as it often does here, Jerry and I were discussing a holiday trip, maybe the coast, maybe the highlands, when we heard steps on the stairs. Emma stood at the threshold, hesitant, like a person stepping onto a shaky bridge. "I want to talk to you both," he said, and we nodded. He sat fidgeting, then took a breath and spoke. He said he had been thinking a lot, that what he had said to me was wrong, that he hadn't meant to hurt me, that shame had kept him silent all these weeks. He told us he had been seeing the school counselor, who helped him understand that he'd confused kindness for something else, that grief and loneliness can twist feelings, especially when someone new tries to love you inside a house where love once died. He looked me in the eyes for the first time in weeks and asked if I could forgive him. I cried then. I couldn't hold back because forgiveness is a river, and I'd been thirsty. I told him yes, I forgave him, and more than that, I cared for him as family. Jerry told him we were proud of his courage, that learning where the lines are, and how to return once you've crossed them, is the beginning of manhood. Emma nodded, then asked in a quiet voice if he could call me Mom from now on. My heart stopped and then burst like morning. I hugged him, and Jerry wrapped his arms around both of us, and there in our living room while outside the city hummed and a vendor called out the last roasted plantains of the day, we stood as a family. Later, Jerry suggested a celebratory trip during the holidays, perhaps to the old coastal forts or to a game reserve where elephants move like memories across the savannah. Emma said he already had plans to visit his cousin Tony in August and couldn't join us. And Jerry said that was fine, we'd go another time. And Emma teased his father not to schedule any business meetings while traveling with Mom. We laughed, glasses clinking, relief moving through the house like fresh air after rain. And that, friends, is my story, the one I promised to share honestly in my own voice, a story that traveled from a difficult beginning to a tender reconciliation, set in our city of bright markets and evening prayers, where neighbors greet one another at the gate and the radio plays high life and Afro beats on weeknights. It taught me that families aren't born fully formed. They are built, patiently, with boundaries and apologies, with the courage to speak and the strength to listen, with plates left at doors and doors eventually opened. It taught me that a boy can be lost and still find his way back, that a father's firmness can be a bridge and not a wall, that a woman's kindness can be strong without becoming a weakness, and that love, the real kind, is both tender and disciplined. If you've watched or listened all the way to this point, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, because this is how we learn from one another in our village that spans continents now, connected by screens but still human at the core. Tell me what you think about the choices I made and what you might have done in my place. And if there's ever a part 2 to this journey, what would you like to see? More about how we navigated counseling as a family, how holidays feel now that he calls me Mom, how we keep our home safe and warm when life gets noisy again. Thank you for being here with me under this wide sky, for listening with patience and compassion, and for sharing your own wisdom. And as we say where I come from, may peace walk with you as you go.